Hello everybody, welcome back to the Scouted Football Podcast with me, Joe Donoghue. A couple of leagues already back underway in Europe for the 2021-22 season, while the Olympics have been popping off in Tokyo with both the men's and women's games throwing up some really big scorelines. We've had back-to-back hat-tricks from Zambia's Barbara Banda in the women's, Sylvain Ripoll in France stinking out the place in the men's, which regular listeners of the Scouted Patreon pod will know was to be somewhat expected. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. It's one of those top flights across Europe that is already underway. That's our topic of discussion. And joining me to talk all about some of the really interesting moves and the happenings in the Austrian Bundesliga over the summer, it couldn't really be anyone else, could it? Lee Wingate from the excellent The Other Bundesliga team is here. Lee, this must be the hat-trick on the Scouted pod now. How are you doing?
Yeah, I think it's been a few appearances, so thanks for having me back on again. That must mean I didn't disgrace myself too much the first one or two times. But yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Yeah, looking forward to getting into the meat and drink of the moves that have taken place, because obviously there's been a few players from the Austrian Bundesliga come over to the Premier League, which I think is of particular interest to anybody who hasn't watched the likes of Enock and Mwepu or Patson Daka before. But there's also been some interesting incomings to teams in the Austrian Bundesliga as well, and I think for those of us who are inclined to enjoy youth football and young players, that is it's definitely a league which always seems to throw up some interesting players at interesting clubs. So Lee, fill us in sort of on the end of the 2020-21 season. Of course, Red Bull Salzburg, unsurprisingly, were crowned champions once again, but there's been a bit of managerial turnover there with Jesse Marsch leaving. Matthias Jaissle coming in. I've probably butchered the pronunciation there because he's very much new on the senior management scene. But who is the new man leading Red Bull Salzburg?
Well, actually, I can't tell you too much about the pronunciation just yet. I think it's Matthias Jaissle, but I haven't actually heard it pronounced out loud yet. So I'm just going on the assumption that's how you say it. He is extremely young. That tends to be a bit of a trend, as you know, with Salzburg, players and coaches, but they seem to be getting younger and younger all the time. So after they completed their latest double at the end of last season, Jesse Marsch moved up the Red Bull food chain to RB Leipzig, and Jaissle has come in. He's one of these very young coaches that seems to to have a lot of faith from those within the Red Bull system, and that's because that's where he started at Leipzig after his own playing career was cut short by injury. So in that sense, a bit like Julian Nagelsmann's was. He then moved to Brøndby for a while to be an assistant, and then has come back to the Salzburg youth system, and more recently Liefering, the feeder club, where he was only appointed in January of this year, actually. So it's been a relatively short stint for him there. He almost won the league, actually only missed out on the second division league title by one goal to Blau-Weiß Linz. So he's done a good job so far, but this is obviously a big step up for him and a big test as well.
You mentioned in there about Liefering and obviously missing out on that title by a single goal. Obviously, Liefering playing in the division below Red Bull Salzburg and are a satellite club essentially of the Red Bull network. And you mentioned their Blau-Weiß Linz, but they finished obviously as champions essentially of the second tier, the Zweite Liga in Austria, and with Liefering in second. Neither of those teams were promoted though, were they? It was third place Klagenfurt who went up. The Liefering one is pretty straightforward to understand, considering that they are essentially a team made up of FC Red Bull Salzburg's young players, so it'd be a bit of a conflict of interest there, to say the least, if they were in the same competition. But am I right in thinking that Blau-Weiß Linz are a loose affiliate of LASK, so didn't apply for a Bundesliga license for that reason?
It's actually a little bit different to that, but before we get stuck into that, I'll just tell you a nice little anecdote that I really enjoyed about Blau-Weiß Linz. When they did win the title on the final day of the season here, just a few months ago, they celebrated by bringing a shopping trolley full of beer cans onto the pitch and just started drinking a few tinnies with each other, which I really enjoyed. But they are a club that is not actually affiliated with LASK. They're based in the same city. They've been LASK's rivals or city rivals for a number of years. But actually, as tends to often be the case in the Austrian second division, they chose not to apply I think, for a license, or they chose a few years ago that they were not infrastructurally ready, and that is the reason why they couldn't go up this season. They do not fulfill the infrastructure requirements. So it's a shame, but it does happen more often than you'd think in Austria. What actually happens is that if you don't finish in the top one or two of the second division, then you can't be promoted automatically, which is why there was a playoff between St. Pölten, who finished bottom of the Bundesliga, the top flight, and Austria Klagenfurt, who ended up going up at their expense, who finished third. So it's not a relatively rare occurrence. The last playoff was only, I think, 2018, so it's happened before, but there are just a lot of teams that are not financially or infrastructurally ready to play top division football in Austria.
No, that's really interesting. I knew, obviously, I saw Linz, and I thought, oh well, surely, given the fact that, I mean, I know a few clubs are affiliated there, I thought, oh, that must be the reason why. But no, that's quite interesting. I hadn't come across that before. Obviously, you guys have, but yeah, I mean, it's quite curious, I think, and also with the pronunciation on the new Salzburg manager, who I'm not going to try and pronounce his name again because I've already forgotten the correct way to say it. But let's get on to the players. Let's get on to some of the transfers that have taken place over the summer. Obviously, the big one, the marquee signing, or rather the marquee departure from the Austrian Bundesliga, was Patson Daka to Leicester City, roughly around a €30 million transfer fee, which is what was that, 10 million more than what Erling Haaland went to Borussia Dortmund for. He's a player who I'm incredibly fond of. Always seems to speak very well, very humble, very grateful for the opportunity to play professional football, and I think that came across in his first few sort of interviews as a Leicester player. We're still yet to see him in a Leicester shirt in the Premier League, but I think a lot of people are gonna, I don't know, wake up to that. I mean, anybody who's listened to this podcast will probably have been waxing lyrical about him to their friends and family for the amount of times that we've mentioned him on the pod. But it's a move which I'm incredibly pleased with, because I think he's somebody who, I mean, you'll echo this as well. He's somebody who is just fantastic on the break, just on the shoulder. He's just got electric speed, just glides over the turf almost weightlessly. And you think about the clubs in the Premier League who have a striker who plays excellently on the shoulder of the last man, and the first one that springs to mind is Leicester City with Jamie Vardy. So I do think it's an example of very effective scouting, and I mean they've paid a pretty penny for him, but I think he'll integrate well into that group at Leicester. It's not too big of a move where the expectation will be crushing. So I'm pleased. I'm pleased for him. How did Daka finish his time in Austria? Because it seemed as though any time I tuned in to one of Salzburg's games, it was just goal after goal after goal.
I'd say it's worth talking about the fees in a bit more detail a little bit later, because Salzburg's profit margins are frankly ridiculous on some of these young players that they've scouted, developed and sold on. But to answer your question, first of all, I mean, he finished the season, I think he went through the whole season as the elite player in the division. His early season was a little bit hampered by a hamstring injury that I think he suffered in the Champions League, and was then out for 5 or 6 weeks. But nonetheless, for the first time in his Austrian career, he finished the season as the division's top scorer with 27 goals in 28 games. He was named the Bundesliga's player of the season. And, he's often compared to Erling Haaland. He was his direct replacement. And if you look at their figures from the last 2 seasons while at Salzburg, they're relatively similar. You've got Erling Haaland in 2019 to 20 on a goal every 61.25 minutes, and Daka on a goal every 72.29 in 2021. So quite similar outputs. Obviously, Haaland a little bit stronger, but Daka is a great player, like you said, very grounded. But in terms of his technical qualities, his pressing, his pace, his work rate, intelligence, two-footed finishing, they're all tremendous strengths. And as you say, I think that will fit in very well to Leicester City's playing style. I just hope that he gets the minutes, because at his stage of the development, he does need to get game time. And, you've got Vardy and Enock, both playing up front at the moment for Leicester City. So we do hope that he'll get chances. But yeah, we wish Patson every success in England, and I think he's going to make a name for himself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's done so well in Austria, and he was kind of very much in Haaland's shadow to begin with, and then sort of, I mean, while he was still posting extremely good, goal per minute ratios, while Haaland was still there, it was the fact that he, as soon as he departed, it was Daka just hoovered up. He just filled that chasm, filled that gap with his own goals. What was it, 27 and 28 last year? It's just phenomenal numbers, especially from a player who missed 5 or 6 weeks of the season with a hamstring injury. The thing for me about him is that he's just it's his athleticism. He's almost acrobatic in the penalty area sometimes. Shots that other players might not be able to take on because it might hit them on the thigh, or it might just be too much for them to contort themselves around. Daka always seems to position himself really well so that he actually can get a clean strike on things. And yeah, I mean, I've been telling everybody who listen that he's a one-touch, two-touch finishing master. And yeah, I think that will hopefully stand him in good stead, given that the options that Leicester have this year. Obviously, Vardy's not quite coming to the end of his time there. He's not at the peak of his powers anymore, but he's still very much a fantastic option to have up front. And Iheanacho's end of season form last year was obviously a bit of a resurgence. So I think they're well stocked. And if hypothetically you were saying Patson Daka was your third choice striker, then I mean, incredible depth. But you were talking about Red Bull Salzburg's profit margins there, and I mean they are enormous. You've just said, I mean, what, 5-10 minutes ago, about how some clubs in the second tier, infrastructurally, financially, they can't come up because or rather they choose not to apply for a Bundesliga license because they simply won't be able to afford it, or afford the additional costs of being a Bundesliga club. I mean, speaking of the fees, I mean it's silly money, isn't it? But even sillier for a domestic league like Austria.
Yeah, I think the chasm between Salzburg and the rest of the clubs in the Bundesliga, and of course the other clubs in other divisions, is just going to widen because of this, this incredible scouting network and the way they bring players through and sell them for such a profit. And as you say, it might not sound like a huge amount of money when you compare it to the likes of the Premier League or some of some of Europe's other biggest leagues. But here in Austria, it's just stratospheric amounts of money. Daka himself was signed for €250,000. If he's been sold for €30 million, that's 120 times what they bought for him, and it's just crazy. And it's been pretty much the same consistently for the last few years. It is just the Salzburg way. They made almost 30 million on Keita, 19 million on Mane, 12 million on Haaland, 18.2 million on Haidara, another almost 20 on Kaleta. And when you consider the fact that I think the biggest transfer fee that an Austrian club has ever paid, which was Salzburg, is around 11 million for the Swiss winger Noah Okafor. I mean, it just tells you all you need to know about the volumes and what they mean to Austrian football. So kudos for Salzburg. This business model is clearly working for them. And I can't really think of another club in world football, and I'm sure there must be some, so I'd be interested to hear, but I can't really at the moment, off the top of my head, think of another club that gets the same percentage profit margins consistently as Red Bull Salzburg.
No, absolutely. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't think either. I'm sure there probably is one, maybe at in a percentage sense at a lower level. But I mean, as consistently as Salzburg do it at the very top level, competing in European competition, it's quite staggering. I'm very conscious of not making this an exclusively FC Red Bull Salzburg podcast. Unfortunately, there've been a few other transfers which have definitely taken my eye. We'll go on to one of those now, and that's Yusuf Demir to Barcelona, or rather Barcelona B. You mentioned Yusuf Demir on the first Scouted Football, other Bundesliga crossover podcast we did. I think that was back in 2019, believe it or not. And you were saying that this kid had been showing stuff for Rapid Vienna, and that in very fleeting flashes, he was showing that he was a very talented youngster. Did you ever envisage that Barcelona would be taking him on a season-long loan to put into their B team?
I mean, I'd be lying if I said I envisaged that. We know that there have been top clubs that have been interested in him for quite a while, but you hear that all the time, don't you, in headlines, or top clubs are interested in him. And obviously, he is a very good player, but I was still surprised when Barcelona agreed this deal. It's an interesting deal, I have to say, because it is a loan initially. It's a 1 year loan for €500,000, which is still a lot for Rapid Vienna, and then with a non-binding purchase option of 10 million. So it remains to be seen whether he stays there and how it works out. But he seems to have been impressing already, and I think he's actually been included in the first team's training camp, which ironically is coming back to Austria, and they'll be playing against Red Bull Salzburg next week. So we'll get to have another chance to look at Demir and see him in his new surroundings. But yeah, certainly a surprising transfer, I have to say.
Yeah, definitely. It's for me so far. It's the strangest transfer or loan of the summer to date. I mean, just for anybody who hasn't heard of Yusuf Demir before and is now thinking, well, oh, I'm behind Barcelona. Why have they decided to go for him in such a strange deal anyway? What is he like? What is he good at? How frequently did he play for Rapid last season? Because he's still very much. I mean, he's still a teenager, isn't he?
Yeah, he's 18, and I think that that's one of the things that made this deal even more surprising is that throughout last season, despite him being consistently one of Rapid's strongest performers, he was regularly used off the bench by the coach Didi Kubauer. So I think that made it a little bit more surprising because if you've got a player that's playing from the start and lighting up the league, then it comes as a bit less of a surprise when they move to a club like Barcelona. But he has been mainly used off the bench. You hear comparisons to Messi for a lot of players almost constantly, but it has to be said that the way he likes to play is in some way reminiscent of Messi, in the sense that he is kind of comfortable in a roaming sort of number 10 role, but preferably kind of cutting in from the right and then shooting on his left. He scored an absolutely wonderful goal by doing exactly that against SV Ried in the league this year, and it did remind me somewhat of that classic Messi type goal that you see. His main strengths, I would say, are ball carrying. He's got a very low center of gravity, good finisher specifically with his left foot. And I really like the way how he receives the ball between the lines and then turns. And there's such close control, such sort of mastery there that I think, perhaps that's where those comparisons with Messi have come from. Obviously, he's got a long way to go in his development. And he hasn't really racked up the kind of numbers in the Austrian Bundesliga that would turn heads. I think it's 6 goals and 4 assists in 39 matches. But, I think those numbers will come. And as I say, you have to remember he has been getting sort of 15 or 20-minute bursts at the end of games to make impressions. And that's not always the best environment to have the highest numbers per game.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that that Barcelona have now decided to pivot their scouting towards replacing Lionel Messi if they can't register him. It's definitely one of the interesting moves of the summer, obviously concerning Austria. In terms of what it's going to impact, how it's going to impact Rapid this season. I mean, you mentioned there that the coach didn't really start him all too often. So is it necessarily going to be such a big miss? And, how far would 10 million euros go if Barcelona decided that at the end of the season, if they could manage to find 10 million euros, that is, if they decided that, they wanted to sign Demir on a permanent deal?
I mean, that's a massive amount of money for Rapid. They were one of the clubs that suffered the most during the coronavirus lockdowns because they have, the biggest support of any club in Austria and the biggest stadium as well, the Allianz Stadion. And they obviously weren't able to fill that. They really missed out the gate receipts, that sort of thing. And they don't really tend to sell players for big amounts of money either. So, if they did get 10 million, it would make a huge impact for them. But equally, if Demir then comes back and he's had a year away at Barcelona and they've still got a bit of money for it, then I'm sure they'd be not too displeased about that as well. So there are benefits all around from the transfer, I think, for them. In terms of how it will affect their season, I think they will probably miss him because I think this would have been, I don't want to use the phrase breakout season, but it could have really been the chance where he got more of a run in the team, and he would have probably been one of their leading attacking players this season. So they will miss him for sure. And I think, maybe that was evident from their opening day of the season where they lost 2-0 to Hartberg, who are a much smaller club with a much smaller budget. So, yeah, I'm sure he will be a miss, but there'll be benefits from the transfer as well.
It's a bit like a gap year, isn't it? Yusuf Demir going on his gap year to Barcelona. He might end up coming back to Rapid, and he'll come back and have all these stories of what it was like living in one
Yeah.
of Spain's biggest cities and whatnot, and he'll bring all this inspiration back. But no, I hope he does well there. I mean, it's probably playing devil's advocate, but because he hasn't actually played that much professional football. But how do you envisage him potentially getting on over there? I mean, he's predominantly going to play for the B team. Like we know that that's going to be the case. But we saw what I mean, I'm not putting him on the same plane as Pedri, but we saw what Pedri did last year, where he came in from Las Palmas, hadn't had any experience of the top flight. Before, and became an absolutely integral part of that Barcelona squad. So, it's not impossible to break into that team, but I think with the options that are in Yusuf Demir's position, then perhaps he might be fighting an uphill battle in the first team sense.
Yeah, I don't want to talk him up too much from the start, but I think, I don't follow Spanish football closely, but it is quite clear, as you alluded to earlier, that with Messi's registration, that Barcelona are in a bit of a financial problem at the moment, to say the least. And I just wonder if, they're not able to register everyone they want to, and they've got this young kid who impresses within the B team setup, whether that might be something that sort of accelerates or fast tracks him to the first team. They still do have a wealth of very good options there, but that might be something that gives him a little bit more of a look in when it comes to the first team. We'll have to see how that unfolds, but I certainly think it's a very promising sign that Ronald Koeman has already taken a look at him and said, that he has a great future. So I think things look promising. We'll just have to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, it'll definitely be one to keep an eye on. And I do say that a lot on this podcast, but I really implore people to maybe keep an eye on the progress of Demir while he's at Barcelona B, because, as Lee says, who knows, something strange might happen. We know that Ousmane Dembele is typically injury prone. So, there may be a slot opening up there. Moving on to the next outgoing from the Austrian Bundesliga this summer. And it's another one to the Premier League. It's another one from FC Red Bull Salzburg. It's another Zambian international. Enock and Mwepu signed for Brighton in around a 25 million euro deal, I believe. His last 12 months in Salzburg played as something of an advanced midfielder in Jesse Marsch's 4-2-2-2 formation, which was a bit different from where he originally played when he came into the first team there, which was obviously as a more defensive-minded midfield player. First of all, Lee, I mean, is this another feel-good move? Is this another one where you think, obviously, it's going to make the balance sheet look quite handsome, but also, you've got two players who were scouted from Zambia, from Kafue Celtics, who are now going to play in the Premier League for, quite forward-thinking clubs in the same summer?
Yeah, I think it is, it really attests to what Salzburg are doing to sell two players for similar fees, to the Premier League in one summer. It shows that they are producing, players that are renowned and highly regarded all over the world. It's going to be a big blow for Salzburg to lose both of them in one summer for sure. And I think, we always talk about strikers because it's easy to measure when it comes to goal output and assists. Those numbers are very clear. And that's one of the reasons why Daka gets so much credit here in Austria. But Mwepu is a great player. He's very clever. He does his job well. He's a hard worker for the team. He's good in a wide variety of positions, as you alluded to. He's primarily a box to box midfielder, but I've also seen him play in a defensive line. I've seen him play in this role further forward on the right that Jesse Marsch liked to put him in, and he looks comfortable more or less everywhere. I really like him. He's nicknamed the computer by his teammates because of his, reading of the game and his ability to sort of predict what's going to happen and where he needs to be positioned. So I think, there's a lot of good things that Brighton fans will be able to look forward to having Mwepu in the side.
I love that little moniker, the computer. I think that's fantastic. I think if my teammates came up with that, I think that's the biggest endorsement anyone could ever have come up with about anyone playing football. You can talk about all these players who score hatfuls of goals, but just actually seeing everything that happens on the pitch and being lauded for it, that's for me. I'd love to be Enock and Mwepu.
He loves it as well. He's always, he does refer to himself as the computer now. So I think he sees that similarly to you.
He plays up to it. I love that as well. I like that he believes his own hype a little bit there. I actually saw Brighton tweet a few days after he'd been announced that They refer to him as the computer as well. So clearly the social media team have done their homework on him. So I quite like that as well. And I'm quite pleased with Brighton being the club he's landed at, because again, with Daka, he could have ended up at a bigger, a quote unquote bigger club, where the expectation can be suffocating. But I think he'll do really well at Brighton. Same with Daka at Leicester, provided they both get the minutes. And I really do like the style, the versatility that Mwepu has, and I think that's going to lend itself quite well to the fact that Potter can sometimes be a bit more open-minded when it comes to the formations, especially in the middle of games. So I think it's a really, really shrewd signing. The more that I discuss it, the more that I think about it, I think this is potentially one of the smarter additions that the Premier League club will make this summer. We've waxed lyrical about him there a little bit. Would you say there are any weak spots that you've identified in his game over the past few years from watching him in Austria?
Well, I knew that you'd want to talk about this, so I actually did a little bit of digging and spoke to a few people, because if I had to pick some out off the top of my head, I wouldn't really be able to. I wouldn't say there are any really obvious weaknesses there, but there are perhaps a few things that he could improve. His performances are generally very good, but maybe a little bit more consistency. Perhaps that's just something that comes as you develop. He's still a young guy. Maybe as well. Sometimes he does lose the ball because he plays riskier passes, I think, which, when it works, it works. But he likes to play these vertical passes between the lines, and he can give the ball away quite a bit, which is obviously something that then if you're playing against a good counter-attacking team, you can end up being punished for that. And perhaps as well, man marking maybe from set pieces, but that would really be, I think, doing him a bit of a disservice to say that they're all massive weaknesses in his game. I just think that they are some elements that he could perhaps improve on, and I'm sure he will under Potter's tutelage.
Yeah, I read something by Simon Clark, obviously of the other Bundesliga, one of the trio along with Tom Midler and Lee. He was, I think he was interviewed by a newspaper about Mwepu when Brighton had originally signed him, and he did also pick out the potentially marking at set pieces for a player who is so imposing, so tall, that was potentially one of the weak spots. But I think I echo what you're saying there. It's one of those areas where you are going out there to look for something because the question is being asked, essentially. And I think that's a good sign because, apart from Messi or Yusuf Demir, perhaps, there aren't many players who are absolutely perfect in every way. So yeah, I think a very, very shrewd signing on the whole. Next on the list of transfers in the Austrian Bundesliga, we've actually got an incoming. So we've discussed the departures of Patson, Daka, Enock and Mwepu, and Yusuf Demir to Leicester, Brighton and Barcelona, respectively. But we've actually got an incoming, which is quite interesting and very intriguing from a scouted football perspective. Noah Ohio, who is a joint Dutch and England youth international. I actually don't know off the top of my head whether he's declared for one or the other yet, but between 2018 and 2019 he played as a forward or as a left winger simultaneously for the Netherlands and the Dutch under 16, the Netherlands and the English under 16 teams, which I thought was quite intriguing because I was looking down on Transfermarkt and there he was playing for England, and then 2 months later, quite literally 2 months to the day later, he was playing for the Netherlands, and I thought, it's very interesting, but a very Jamal Musiala of him. But he has joined Austria Vienna in the Austrian Bundesliga on loan for the season from RB Leipzig, which is an interesting move. It's quite curious considering that obviously the pathway, the arterial nature that players from Leipzig and Salzburg do share, that he's actually gone to Austria Vienna. He was previously with Vitesse in the Netherlands, but didn't really get too much of an opportunity there. He initially joined them on an 18-month loan at the start of this year, back in January, but that was cut short after 6 months. I think he only played around 60 minutes across 4 or 5 games, so that was a bit of a wasted endeavour. But now coming into the Austrian Bundesliga, coming to Austria Vienna, then hopefully there's the opportunity for him to play a little bit more regularly, maybe get a bit more confidence in him, as he kind of looked a little bit short of that in a few pre-season friendlies that I had a little perusal over before recording this. But I mean, Liam, I presume you obviously will be coming into this one relatively relatively blind, considering that Ohio hasn't really been a name on Austrian football aficionados' radars recently. But from an Austria Vienna perspective, is he going to play more than he did at Vitesse, do you think?
Well, first of all, from our perspective, it's great to have another Englishman coming over here and playing in the league. We haven't had one for a while. Well, we've had Rennie Smith, but he's also dual nationality and Austrian as well. So it's good to have him in the league. As you say, I don't really know too much about him yet, but to put Austria Vienna's situation into a bit of context, this is one of the biggest clubs in Austria. They are the record cup champions by a long way. They've won a lot of titles. But over the past few years, they were the last club actually away from Salzburg to win the Bundesliga in 2013. And since then, they've really fallen quite far, especially financially. And, the situation was so precarious towards the end of last season that they were initially rejected a license to play in the Bundesliga this season, which was, an almost unthinkable scenario for such a big club with such a big fan base. And, they managed to sort themselves out. They appealed and they managed to get the license. But, from that point of view, they had to sell one of their best players, Christoph Monschein. Well, in fact, their best player by far, a player that likes to score lots of goals and sort of plays all across the attack. And he was pivotal to Austria Vienna the last few seasons. It seems that they are now looking for cheaper options, and they've brought in this young guy who, may end up being a more or less like-for-like replacement for Monschein, and certainly will have plenty of opportunities to play, because this is a club that's in a very poor position and has lost a lot of its players. So I'd say in that sense, it makes sense. Perhaps he might be going there into a bit of a difficult situation. They probably won't win too many games this season, but yeah, he'll certainly get minutes of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, it must be said he's still 18 years old. So I mean, the most important thing at the moment is not immediate success. It's minutes on the pitch and actually, getting used to regular football, having grown into his frame properly. He was actually, when he was born in the Netherlands, came over to Manchester United at 12 and then went to Manchester City at 13. So that's how he qualified to become sort of an England youth international. But I think he might end up declaring for the Netherlands, given obviously the strength that England's youth groups have and the lack of football that he's had. But he's a very talented player, and I think that having the opportunity to show that will be vitally important in sort of determining whether he does declare for the Netherlands or England. And this is probably the point where someone is listening to this who knows whether he's declared and is actually thinking, scouted football don't know what they're on about. But yeah, we know Ohio. I'm hoping that we'll see a bit of him in the Austrian Bundesliga this season with Austria Vienna. Moving away from transfers, the season began last week with a round of matches, one of which FC Red Bull Salzburg won, which is not at all surprising. I'm sure you'll agree with me there, Lee. They beat Sturm Graz 3-1, and there was 2 Karim Adeyemi goals and 1 Karim Adeyemi assist. So that is probably a little bit of a precursor to what will be the one of the long-running themes in this Austrian Bundesliga season. He started up front with Benjamin Šeško, who's an 18-year-old striker. Adeyemi himself is only 19. But they looked extremely exciting. They've definitely been on the radar for a little while. They did very well at Liefering, very well in the UEFA Youth League. And now their time has come at the pinnacle of their Austrian careers at FC Red Bull Salzburg.
Yeah, it seems like to start the opening game of the season, it seems like they must be relatively high up the priority list for the new coach, Matthias Jaissle, who has actually worked with both of them, Šeško more than Adeyemi, within the Liefering setup. And yeah, Adeyemi had an absolute blinder. Red Bull Salzburg actually went behind. There was an own goal, which was awarded following the first ever decisive VAR intervention in Austrian football, because that's only been introduced this summer. So Salzburg found themselves a goal down. But then they came back and Adeyemi scoring 2 goals, the second of which was an absolutely lovely left-footed half volley from outside the penalty area and producing a lovely, lovely cross, perfectly weighted to set up Rasmus Christensen for the other goal. So he's had a flying start to the season. After what was perhaps not an entirely plain sailing season for him last season, because he was sort of initially in this role where he was between Liefering and Salzburg, and he got a bit of criticism from Jesse Marsch, public criticism, which is not really something that Jesse Marsch did. So it was a bit of an outlier. He said he wasn't ready and he was making the wrong decisions, but he seems to have started this season all guns blazing, and he'll definitely be one to watch. And it just seems to me, observing Salzburg over the last few years, as if, as I mentioned at the start of this episode, they just get younger and younger and younger all the time. They've got a strike partnership who between them are the same age as one of the other club's main strikers. So it goes to show just how young this Salzburg team is, and just how good they are as well.
It's beginning to remind me a little bit of the Generation Foot and Diamba academies in Senegal, where they play in the top division in the African country, and they are populated essentially by kids. They're 17, 18, 19-year-olds predominantly in those teams. Ismail Assar is one of those who came through Generation Foot. Sadio Mane was one. We actually got a podcast episode on that with Ed Aarons from The Guardian. But that it's beginning to remind me a little bit of that, because apart from Ulma, I think, with was it Andre Ramayo who's left for PSV, there's not too many players over the age of sort of 27 or so now in that team, and even with Jaissle, he's 33 himself, so the management aren't exactly getting on. But I mean, with Adeyemi and Šeško, 19 and 18 respectively, there's great hope. I mean, there's great hope definitely from us at Scouted. I'm a huge fan of Adeyemi. Just his ability to, I mean, he crouches when he runs, and he's like a little Tasmanian devil, I think, sometimes. He just, how he just kind of, he'll just sprint to the opponent, whoever's on the ball, and he'll barge them off it, and you think, this kid's got some cojones on him. Like he's absolutely flying into these shoulder to shoulder challenges. And then of course on the counter attack, he's just an absolute demon, just a complete threat. One thing I noticed actually through I've been doing a little hint to any Scouted Football Handbook subscribers. I've been doing a little bit of watching of Karim Adeyemi recently. Can't say what for, but I began to notice that goalkeepers have started to kind of alter their starting positions. They're really high again when playing against Salzburg, and there was a bit of that in the preseason friendlies. There was a bit of that with Sturm Graz as well, and I thought that surely isn't a coincidence that I'm noticing this across the board. And I think this is purely speculation, but I think it might be to do with the fact that Adeyemi is just, I mean, he can be a threat 70 yards from goal, can't he? Like, if Salzburg are defending a set piece from the opposition and they get their foot on the ball and Adeyemi's on the shoulder, he's away. There's no way you're going to catch him.
I think that's always been one of the defining characteristics of Red Bull Salzburg. They are fast. They do everything faster than the opposition. I mean, they do a lot of it better as well, but they do everything faster. And when you look at all of their team, they've got a lot of very pacey players. But Adeyemi is another level entirely. He's like a whirlwind on the counter attack, and I think that he and Šeško will complement each other very well, because you've got one of those players who is very happy carrying the ball, sprinting forward, very fast, very dynamic. And then you've got Šeško, who's a bit taller, a bit more physical, but also, strong technical ability and speed himself. So I think they're going to be a real handful for defenders this season. And we saw a bit of that already against Sturm Graz. So I'm really looking forward to see how they develop. And, in terms of, me saying that Salzburg's players just seem to get younger and younger, I often joke with Tom and Simon that they're going to be wearing nappies soon, because it is just amazing how much younger they're consistently getting.
Yeah, it is quite incredible. But pivoting away a little bit from Red Bull Salzburg again, just before we finish this week's episode, your dark horses to challenge Salzburg for the title, at least some of the way this season, because we know that it might be a runaway train at some point. But who do you think might have a chance of challenging them? Kudos if you can name one which has a bit of a youth-centric focus to it. But if there isn't, then don't worry.
Yeah, I can. I'll fit that in later. But first of all, I'll tell you about just how I embarrassed myself in the other Bundesliga WhatsApp group recently by saying, thinking perhaps just how young this Salzburg team is. They've got a very, very inexperienced coach, even compared to Jesse Marsch, who was here before. I said I think another club, other than Salzburg, are going to win the league this season. I made a bit of a bold prediction, because it's got to end sometime. They've already won 8 titles in a row. And then on the opening day, Rapid Vienna went and crashed. Salzburg beat Sturm Graz. So already looking very foolish after one round of matches. But I think if there's going to be one club who rivals Salzburg again, it would be Lask, and they've got a very good team and they play very well. But consistency has been their problem over the last 2 years. They've had spells where they rack up win after win, and then they really slip up quite a lot over a long period, and you just cannot do that if you want to get the better of Salzburg in the league. But I would say Lask, in terms of their new signings, they've probably got the biggest financial strength outside of Salzburg, and they've brought in something like 12 players this season, only 2 of whom are over the age of 23. So that is a really, a very much a youth focus for them, and we would hope that if there is going to be a title race this season, then Lask will be in it as well.
Very, very interesting then. Quickly, before we go and wrap up today's episode, I do believe it is the other Bundesliga's 3rd birthday today, is it not?
Yeah, it certainly is. It's the 3 years ago today since we started our Twitter page and the podcast as well. Got a nice little reminder on Twitter this morning. But yeah, we were reminiscing and reflecting a little bit on how the journey has changed, because we really started this with the objective of falling in love with the local league a bit. We thought, we're here, we might as well do something and try and find out more about the league. And it was very much, a podcast that you start where you've got bed sheets hanging up in the room to try and, insulate the sound better, a crappy little mic that we had that we were all crowded around. And yeah, it just seems to have transformed a lot. We've been lucky enough to have the opportunities now to be accredited journalists, to write for the Bundesliga's magazine in English, to work with some of the clubs as well, and to really experience some great moments. I think it's coincided, fortunately, with a real renaissance for Austrian football. We've had the likes of Tottenham, Liverpool, Man United over here as well at various times. England was supposed to be here had it not been for coronavirus and the delay to Euro 2020. So we've been lucky in that sense as well, but it's been a great journey, and now we definitely have fallen in love with the league, and we'd recommend anyone out there who doesn't know too much about it to check out our Twitter channel at Other Bundesliga, because we've recently compiled some information about where you can watch the league overseas, which has always been one of the main things that people have been asking. I'm interested, but I can't find anywhere to watch it, and there are quite a lot of solutions now. So yeah, if you're interested or want to get interested in Austrian football, check us out at Other Bundesliga, and you can find the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, and yeah, all the usual platforms as well.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure following you guys and the work that you've done. I know for a fine fact, that I know a hell of a lot more about the Austrian Bundesliga because of the podcast, because of the Twitter account. So yeah, if anybody who hasn't checked them out yet, if you're a new listener to the Scouted Pod, then do check out the Other Bundesliga, because it is a very fascinating league. I mean, as we've discussed in the past 40 minutes or so. But yeah, that's all from us today on the Scouted Pod. We've discussed a few transfers that have taken our fancy. Patson, Daka to Leicester, Yusuf Demir to Barcelona or Barcelona B, Enock and Mwepu to Brighton, Noah Ohio to Austria Vienna, and of course the beginning of the season for Karim Adeyemi and Benjamin Sesko at Red Bull Salzburg. But that's all from us. Thank you very much for tuning in. Take care, stay safe. Bye for now.